I have so many wounds that if they were visible, I think my jacket would be covered in blood at some point. I think we all collect wounds throughout our entire lives. I've had a lot of dark times in my life. I've had periods where I have faced racism, for example. I have faced dangerous people. I've been in the middle of riots. I've risked my life on more than one occasion. I've seen more dead bodies than I could even count now. I have seen some really dark stuff in my life, and each one of those will create an etch on your soul.
In personal relationships, intimacy, just general intimacy, being able to relate to your partner in a way which keeps deepening the relationship into new levels and taking you into areas that you never could have imagined simply because you are present.
How do I build rapport with other people? How do I sit at meetings? How do I contribute to meetings? How do I do a presentation? How do I have those difficult conversations, as you've mentioned? How can I become more self-aware about who I am? What are my gaps as a leader, and how do I plug those gaps? We've got targets to meet. We've got KPIs to meet. We've got bottom lines.
We'll do it another day.
We'll do that another day. And this is where organizations make a mistake. Lying on that deathbed, reflecting on your life, maybe taking your last breath and asking yourself, was it worth it?
I don't want to die with regret in my heart at all.
100%. You see these priests doing their thing and they look so devout. They look so amazing. And I always think to myself, yes, but are you being a good person?
My guest today is all about mastering the art of inner leadership. During his 32 years within the UK Police Service, he spent over 2 decades in leadership roles. Having risen to the top levels of leadership, he's since led thousands of people and managed multi-million-pound budgets, as well as strategically commanding the most challenging of critical operational scenarios. Through his unique immersion coaching, he takes you on a journey of deep self-realization before arriving at a roadmap to fulfill your own individual goals. In his popular book, Smash the Habit, he shows us how to transform our lives by overcoming negative habits of the body and mind. He's been a contributor to several well-known magazines, sharing his views on leadership. Kul Mahay is a motivational speaker, executive coach, and mentor, and he trains an international base of clients that includes CEOs, leaders, and organizations. In this conversation, among the things we'll dive deep into are what it takes to unleash the leader in you and how to transform our most impossible habits. Kul, welcome. Namaste.
Namaste.
So good to have you in studio. I know we've spoken. You've interviewed me before.
I have indeed.
This time I have the pleasure of returning the favor. Obviously, we have an introduction for you, but it's always nice to hear from yourself, like, your own self-introduction. I know you've been in the police force more than 30 years. You were in the police force. Now, of course, you are an expert in emotional intelligence and human-centered leadership, amongst other things. You have a program, which we'll talk about a little bit later. You've written books. But tell us a little bit in your own words as to how you've arrived here today and a little bit about your experience in the police force.
I think that's actually a really powerful question to start off with, because, it causes you to actually reflect on the entirety of your life, doesn't it? For me, I joined the police service from the age of 10. That was like my singular passion, just the police service. And I dreamt about it night and day. It's all I ever wanted to do. So consequently, when I got to the age of about 15 and a half, I applied to every single police force in the country, the entire country. And in those days, you could join the police service full-time as a cadet at the age of 16. And I had 26 rejections. And I got to a point where I almost gave up and I started sixth form because I had to go for plan B, which was to be a barrister. I guess that was just for the wig and the sense of authority. But then suddenly this opportunity came up in Derbyshire. I was born and bred in Wolverhampton in the West Midlands. And this opportunity came up in Derbyshire and I just jumped at it. And I joined the police service. I ended up in an alien environment. I left home at the age of 16 to live in a predominantly white area, coming from a cosmopolitan city. It was, when I think back now, I thought I was grown up then. And I look at 16-year-olds now and I think, could they do that? And, it amazes me that I did that at the age of 16.
Yeah, but I think there was a difference. There is a generational difference in maturity.
100%.
In the kind of backgrounds, we've kind of had what we've had to come through, the hardships and all the rest of it. Sometimes that tends to make you a little bit more self-aware.
I think, my dad, I was one of 7. My dad worked in Goodyear's, a tyre factory. My mum was a seamstress. We lived in a 2.5 bedroom terraced house, all 9 of us. I remember it not being a particularly rich household. In fact, I would say we were bordering on poverty. And I remember I laugh with my wife now that we didn't have a bathroom. We had a tin bath, and I'm so grateful for those experiences because they really grounded me. And the one ethic I learned from my dad and my granddad was hard work, consistency and commitment. And, every single one of my siblings has demonstrated that and gone on to become doctors and lawyers and teachers and nurses. I'm really proud of every single one of my siblings. And I put it down to this upbringing that we had. And no less for me in the police service. I joined and I worked hard. I wanted to be the best police officer I could be. I still think it was the best job in the world. I enjoyed it immensely. The work, the change, the impact that you have on the community. But that journey over those 3 decades in the police service also taught me an awful lot around leadership. And what
the
I
lack
did
of
like,
it, perhaps?
well, what I liked and what I didn't like, because the police service at that time was very, very good at dynamic situations, at command and control situations, and perhaps not so good in those scenarios where there is no critical emergency. So now you have to be much more people orientated, much more transformational. And I don't think they were brilliant at that. And it was that aspect that really intrigued me. Around about 1990, I started secretly going on self-development courses. Because if I were to have advertised those to my colleagues, I would have been laughed at.
That would be like a soft thing to do,
100%,
probably, in the police
so
force.
you sort of, I started going on these self-development courses, started finding out about coaching, and started going for qualifications for coaching, started coaching people, and I just got so much joy from it. And the more senior I became, the more I started to practice what I then found out later to be emotional intelligence. I had no idea that I couldn't give it a title. It was just this human-centric leadership. And I just thought very simply that happy people work harder. And it was that for me. So I just tried to create happy workplaces. And, I got to a point where I was almost parachuted into any department that was struggling or failing or was brand new. I would be put in to get that department going. And now I understand why. And that's really took me to where I am now. And, it's 10 years ago since I left the police service. And my journey ever since has been an incredibly steep but incredible process of self-development for myself, self-awareness. I've learned so much about my own self, as well as having that ability to impact across so many industries and across so many sectors. I love it.
Isn't it the case, though, that doesn't matter what we do in life, ultimately, if you are listening to the journey of life, to the journey of the soul, we end up actually learning for ourselves. It's all a learning ground, all of it. Doesn't matter what job you do, doesn't matter whether you're not in a job, you're in a relationship, whether you're a mother raising children. All of it comes down to ultimately the need for becoming more self-aware with a capital S and a small s.
100%.
And then also, I mean, how can we ever have enough skills in life, as a human being?
I absolutely agree with you. I call this leadership. This is true leadership. So, if you Google the word leadership, you will find that in less than 1 second, you get 2 or 3 billion responses. But when you Google the definition of leadership, it's something like it's the act of leading a group of people or an organization. I just think that if you have to use the word leading to describe leadership, it's almost like the dictionary doesn't understand it.
Yeah.
So I came up with my own. I believe leadership is whenever you are in a position of influencing people or you're influencing circumstances, that's leadership. So as you quite rightly say, if you are a parent bringing up children, influencing those children, or you are an elder sibling, or you are a teacher, or you are somebody who is a social media influencer now, you are in a position of leadership. And being that case, you should take that responsibility very seriously. And I don't think enough people take and understand that their position as leaders and take that responsibility seriously
I
enough.
totally agree with you. I mean, I was looking at myself definitions of leadership because I've written a paper on I don't call it human-centered leadership. I call it value-centered leadership.
Yeah, same
and
thing. Yeah,
one of the things that I discovered was that yes, you're right. There are the definitions of leadership are kind of they are so generic and so varied. But I came across one, which is so looking at if we're going to talk to Kul about human-centered leadership, what are the type of leadership is there? And one of the definitions I came across recently was called task-oriented leadership. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So
it's
that's
like
very transactional.
Goal-oriented leadership is where you fulfill goals and then you create a strategy around that. And you take action towards that. And you basically make sure that people get achieve their goals to, in an organization, for example, if you have a target or you're responsible for bringing in a certain amount of revenue for the company or delivering that amount of revenue, then you need to make sure that that happens. And somebody is checking in on you to see whether that's going on.
Yeah. Well, for me, you see, I think whenever you talk about emotional intelligence or you talk about human-centric leadership or value-driven leadership, whenever you talk to many organizations around that, they'll think, it's a bit soft. It's a bit nice to have. But actually, we've got targets to meet. We've got KPIs to meet. We've got bottom lines to meet.
We'll do it another day.
We'll do that another day. And this is where organizations make a mistake, I think. So for me, being highly emotionally intelligent or being human-centric or being value-driven, it doesn't make you a soft person. This is actually, for me, I think, key essential leadership skills. And done rightly, done correctly, these will lead to a better profit margin. It will lead to a better bottom line. It will lead to better performance. So this isn't about becoming a soft person, a soft leader. This is about understanding human beings and the complexity of human beings, and then creating an environment where people feel valued, appreciated, heard, and seen. Now, I have a bee in my bonnet, if you like, around the concept of EDI. So as a young police officer in the early 1980s...
What is EDI?
EDI, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion. Okay. So everybody's talking about EDI and they'll call it DI, whatever. And you've got so many experts. All of a sudden, there's all these experts, and you only have to go onto LinkedIn. There's a plethora of experts around EDI. And the irony for me is, when I joined the police service in the 1980s, purely by the fact that the color of my skin was different to the vast majority of my colleagues, all of a sudden, I was seen to be an expert in EDI. And the conversations that were going on around the table then in the police service were post-Scarman report. In 1981, there'd been these national riots. There was a government inquiry. There was Lord Scarman, who then created a report and said that the police service was institutionally racist. And then in 1990s, we had Stephen Lawrence. And then we had some William McPherson come around, do another report saying exactly the same thing. And recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had Baroness Casey come along, do a report saying exactly the same thing. So for me, there's an awful lot of rhetoric when it comes to issues around equality, diversity and inclusion, but very little action. And I think what we do, we get ourselves trapped into the rhetoric because it feels good. It feels like we're achieving something. And then what we do, we overcomplicate it. We overcomplicate it to such a degree that we don't actually make much headway.
In fact, it ends up having the opposite effect because people feel discriminated against negatively on the other side.
Yes.
So then you have...
So you create divisions, right?
Yeah. So you then end up having to deal with people a certain way because otherwise, there are consequences which are sort of policy based, and therefore that's not really helping people to have a rapport with each other.
Exactly.
If anything,
because
it makes you more...
Because what we tend to do is we tend to homogenize people into all these like characteristics, these groups. So black people, women, gay, straight, so forth and so on. And I actually think that creates division, as you quite rightly say. So for me, the other way of looking at this from the other end of the telescope is not so much around looking at the divisive nature of EDI, is actually to focus in only on the inclusivity. And that then comes back down to cultural transformation, which is what I'm really, really passionate about. If you can create a culture where everybody feels that they are heard, they are seen, they are valued, they are appreciated, their voice is heard, their views are heard, and they can come from different social economic backgrounds and bring all that experience to the table, that's what's going to create a creative and innovative culture in your organization. And if there's one thing we need in today's world, which is very fast changing, is creativity and innovation. But you're going to have cognitive diversity to do that. And I think that's where the focus needs to be when it comes to inclusion.
We'll talk about cognitive diversity and emotional intelligence in a little bit. I just want you to talk about what would it look like when there is more human-centered leadership. What does it look like in real terms in the office, on the ground, in the police force, or in a corporation?
I think what it feels like and what it looks like, because I think there's two elements to it. It is the feeling and it is the looking. From a visual and optic sense, it looks like it's a room, it's an organization where you have people from all walks of life walking in, but they're all focused on the one thing, the outcome, the desired outcome, which is a collective desired outcome, where you have a culture that is high levels, where there's high levels of trust within that culture, where that communication is a two-way style of communication, upward and downward, and where everybody is listened to. And in terms of what does it feel like, it feels like an organization that has a sense of home to it. You know, it feels like an organization where you don't particularly want to leave this organization. And I always remember a quote by Sir Richard Branson, which I absolutely love. And I'll have to paraphrase it, but he says something like, train your people so well that they could leave you, but treat them so well that they never want to leave you.
Nice.
And I think it's that for me. It really is as simplistic as that.
Really, really nice. It really is about the softer things in a sense. More, I'd say it's softer, but then again, see, my view on this emotional intelligence area is like, we don't seem to understand that as a human being, if we don't understand the way that we function and people function, that we don't understand each other, we don't understand ourselves, how are we possibly going to make life into something that is beyond just survival? So really bringing happiness into the equation, bringing fulfillment into the equation, because that really comes down to emotional intelligence.
100%. It all comes down to emotional intelligence and your levels of EQ. Unfortunately, I think in the working environment, in the vast majority of working environments across all sectors, the moment we start talking about emotional intelligence, it's almost like this veil crosses over people's eyes. And
why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's because they've always seen emotional intelligence because of the wording, the very title. They've seen that as being something very soft, but I think it's a hardcore business skill. So, I mean, when I work with organizations, I talk about EQ, but I talk about it in the level of 26 measurable competency areas. And I will say, look, I'm going to measure your EQ across these 26 competency areas, and any one of those competencies we could then focus on to improve that competency. And it's a bit like a washing line. So if you've got 26 items of clothing on the washing line, one is wetter than all the others, it's going to pull that washing line down. But if you dry that one item of clothing, the whole of the washing line goes up. So by focusing in on one measurable competency area, we can raise the level of your emotional intelligence. And if we can do that with you, you can then impact on other people, and you could create a culture where everybody's emotional intelligence starts becoming raised. And so I talk about it in a slightly different way now, only because I know that the language gets people thinking that emotional intelligence is just too soft. It's just a nice to have. And, you know, we're still battling, aren't we, with the whole idea of these soft skills that people very often talk about, hard skills and soft skills. And anything to do with people has traditionally been put into this box of soft skills. And I'm trying to say, no, these are not soft skills. These are hardcore business skills. They will impact on your bottom line. They will impact on your performance. If you cannot keep your people happy, they won't work to their full potential. And we're seeing this in the figures that have come out since COVID, you know, with the Great Resignation. In the United States, according to the US Labor of Statistics, some 47 million people left their workplaces in 2021. And in 2022, 50 million people left their workplaces. Now, we can't even measure things like quiet quitting. Quiet quitting is where people work to their very minimum standard, i.e., just follow the job description, but they don't work to their full potential. Imagine if everybody was so inspired that they worked to their full potential. Where could your company be right now?
Well, so as a coach, call myself, the transformation aspect of this is really about understanding yourself first.
Oh, 100%.
And I think one of the reasons for me, I wonder what you think about this. I feel like the reason why emotional intelligence, self-awareness is the other way of saying emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
If I was talking to an individual, I wouldn't use emotional intelligence as a term. I would use self-awareness. Because what happens, I wonder whether that's because it's not really a thing as such. It's not understood to be a framework inside of which to think as yet.
Yep.
But the moment it becomes something like that, and people are talking about how to treat each other, how to talk to each other and so on, that is acceptable and so on. So it's not that it's not there in the general consciousness right now. It is there.
It's absolutely
It's
there.
just that it's not in it. When you talk about emotional intelligence, it becomes something nebulous. And I wonder whether it's just the term itself. And we really need to step away from calling it this thing, but just giving people the skills, the framework.
Yeah.
To, for example, how can you be more effective in asking for something of a senior in your organization? Or let's move away from organizations. Let's just talk about families and friends, right? Let's just talk about relationships closer to hand. How do we deal with somebody saying something about you that feels to you like disrespect? How do you deal with somebody being dishonest with you?
Yeah.
How about when you want to communicate a hard truth? How do you say it in a way which is not going to tear that person apart, but is actually going to give them an access to being able to transform something that could potentially impact the quality of their life in such a way that they can't imagine? So for me, that it seems to me that we've kind of maybe at a different wave in where we are about talking about transformation, self-awareness, which comes more from the spiritual side, and then emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness, but in a more corporate sense. So I wonder whether we're in version 2, wave 2 of how we communicate ourselves.
There are, those people who truly understand emotional intelligence have taken it to a whole new level, I think. Because I get to speak to people like yourselves, like myself, who, when we talk about emotional intelligence, it goes into a much deeper area. So we're constantly evolving, constantly learning. There are those people out there who use it quite blithely. It's quite a loose term that they use around emotional intelligence. And I think it's because of that usage of the language that it's become incredibly diluted. So we know that emotional intelligence is the title. Underneath emotional intelligence sit the 4 quadrants of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship building. Underneath those, each one of those 4 quadrants is where my 26 measurements are, my 26 core competencies. And I just think that organizations understand that. And then you're absolutely right. Then we have to put it into another language that is even more understandable, that talks less about emotional intelligence, but specifically around those competency areas. So, for example, I was asked to design a program for a psychology doctoral program. And they said, look, we have a disparity of the number of postgraduates coming from their psychology program, but we have a disparity in terms of the number of people applying for the doctoral program. And we think it's something to do with the leadership skills or their self-awareness. And I said, okay. So I designed a program. And at no point in that program do I actually make mention of, this is because you're from an underrepresented group. All I talk about are leadership skills. All the leadership skills I talk about come from emotional intelligence, but I don't talk about emotional intelligence per se, apart from the introduction. So I do, talk about the skill sets that people need to have. The skill sets in terms of, how do I build rapport with other people?
Yeah.
How do I sit at meetings? How do I contribute to meetings? How do I do a presentation? How do I have those difficult conversations, as you've mentioned quite rightly? How can I become more self-aware about who I am? What are my gaps as a leader And how do I plug those gaps? So all of these kind of things come into the fore. And what we've found as a result of that is that there's been an increased number of people not only applying for the doctoral program, but being successful in the doctoral program. So this is the power of emotional intelligence put into practice. And the whole concept of human-centered leadership for me is purely simply because I don't call it emotional intelligence. It is now human-centered leadership because fundamentally it is all about human beings.
Beautiful. So it's really about being able to sort of expand your repertoire of communication and awareness of how, and what, being able to have a little empathy. But empathy gets a lot talked about, and again, it's become so woo-woo in a sense, right? And yet it's really about simply listening to the human being in front of you.
It's about
whether it's just the
effective
words
listening,
words or behavior or just their energy.
Yeah.
And being able to respond to that in a way which is helpful and helps you to have access to being able to have deeper conversations, relationships. And I think in personal relationships, intimacy, just general intimacy, being able to relate to your partner and in a way which keeps deepening, the relationship into new levels and taking you into areas that you never could have imagined simply because you are present to your partner and what's going on, and you're able to actually communicate yourself to them. So I for me, I have to say, I feel like it's something which baffles me that people don't seem to feel the need to develop themselves in absolutely it's not an optional thing. It's an absolute thing, because
I think the world is moving at such a pace that if we are not developing ourselves, we are going to get left behind. And I, for one, don't want to get left behind. And certainly the people I work with, I don't want them to get left behind. And I think, constant self-growth is absolutely critical. You're absolutely right. And the other interesting thing that you mention is this is not just about the workplace.
No.
This isn't just about the workplace. To be a better leader is also to be a better person. And to be a better person means that all the loved ones around you can benefit from that. They get a better version of who you are. And as a consequence of that, they become better versions of them.
And you have a happier relationship with people,
100%.
the people that matter to you in your life. Some people will never, ever come to that because, it's just perhaps not part and parcel of what they think is important in their life. They want to be able to get results through other means, which are less effective. But okay, fair enough. But there are people that I think would just, by understanding that, actually just understanding how to read a person, how to communicate, the words to use, not to use. And more than anything else, for me, the emotional intelligent quotient is really about choice. You have a choice in how you respond to people,
100%.
as opposed to hook, line and sinker, like a fish on a hook, be dragged along and triggered in every other conversation that you are around.
I was having this conversation only yesterday with somebody who came to fix my EV charger on my wall at home. It turned out to be a really wise chap. He's been in the business for 40 years and he was saying, I'm 67 now. I don't really want to stop, but everyone keeps telling me to retire, but I'm enjoying myself. So we ended up having this conversation, but we got on to exactly what you're talking about there, how some people are triggered very easily and have an emotional response to a situation. And some people have this innate ability to take a step back. And I learned this a long time ago when I first became a police inspector. So I was still operational. I was still going out to pub fights when I was commanding, 20, 30 cops in front of me. And on Friday, Saturday night, there'll be pub fights. And I used to, because I was so young, I used to get stuck in and start arresting people. And then a wise old leader once said to me, he says, Cole.
How's it go? You're nicked. You're nicked, mate.
You're Nick Sunshine. But he said, it's all very well you being passionate. He said, but that's not your job anymore. Your job is to be a leader. And you can't be a leader without the strategic perspective. I said, well, how do I get the strategic perspective? He says, you've got to see the big picture.
Yeah.
I said, well, what does that look like? He says, walk to the other side of the road next time there's a pub fight and watch. And then you can direct resources to where they're best needed.
Mm.
And you know what? I tried that next time and I could see the whole picture. Rather than just seeing the person in front of me, I could see all sorts of other people. And I was able to conduct situations much better. I went on to be a goal commander, commanding large-scale critical incidents, investigating serious murders. But I used that all throughout my entire time. And I learned a decision-making model that allowed you to take the emotions out of your decision-making so that you could be more rational. And what's actually going
More
on? It's in the
objective.
brain. Yeah, it's what's happening is in the brain, we have the limbic part of the brain, which is where our emotions reside. It's also where our amygdala reside. Our amygdala, as you know, are the fear receptors, but it's like the oldest part of the brain and one of the fastest parts of our brain. So what happens when we sense things with our five senses? It goes up the brainstem and it goes there first. And most people can't then take that step back. They do say, don't they, count to 10 and take a step back and all of these kind of things. And I think the reason why we need to do that is because we need to engage the prefrontal cortex, where all our logic and our rational decisions, our thinking in the gray begins. And I think that emotional intelligence is fundamental to getting that done, to being a part of that process, rather than making these decisions in the heat of the moment that you then later regret because you don't make good decisions.
So this comes to that quadrant of self-awareness. That if you're not even aware that you are being triggered, then of course you're going to go hook, line and sinker, along with whatever the flow of that conversation is.
Which is why self-awareness, as you quite rightly say, is so important. We have to look at ourselves from a multi-dimensional perspective. And this is why feedback is so important. So when you seek feedback from a whole plethora of people, you're getting a multi-dimensional image of who you are, rather than the one-dimensional image that you see when you look in the mirror. And that's so important.
Exactly. And I think also and then the bit about actually taking a step back to actually see the bigger picture of what the dynamics that are at play, rather than reacting personally. And one of the four agreements, in the book of the four agreements, one of the things that one of the four is like, don't take things personally.
Yeah.
It's a very simple way of putting it, and it's very hard to do. And I think that's also a part of that emotional intelligence training, self-training skill that we develop. Is like, it's very hard not to take things personally because people often intend things to be personal towards you.
But it's so hard not to take things impersonally as well, isn't it now? Because if we look into social media, I see this happening on social media all the time. People say, I'm not very good at posting on social media because I'm frightened of what people might say when they see my post. And you'll see all these social media influencers say, don't worry about what people are going to say. The people that matter will read it. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, actually. And it comes back to exactly what you say. It comes back to the four agreements. Don't worry about what other people are going to think about you.
Well, actually, you know what? One of the Bollywood actresses, it was just scrolling through yesterday, and I heard her say, she said, if I worry about what everyone is saying, then they are living my life. I'm not living my life.
Oh, that's powerful.
I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah,
I thought,
absolutely.
okay, that's a lot of wisdom coming from her.
I once heard a quote, and I don't know whose quote it was, but it was something like, I'd rather be a hero in my own book than be a victim in yours.
Yeah.
I thought, wow.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
There's one from Aristotle talking about quotes that I really like. And he said in the Nicomachean Ethics, he said, anyone can become angry. That is easy. He said, but to be angry with the right person to the right degree at the right time for the right purpose and in the right way, that's not easy.
It's almost impossible.
It's not easy. Yeah. But that is emotional intelligence. That to me hits the nail on the head of what that is. In fact, that is the first quote that comes out of Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence book.
And this creates for me another definition of what emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence is having that grasp, that level of grasp of thinking that level of control over your own thinking, that you know exactly where you are, where you're going for most of the time. It's intentional.
Yeah, and some people are naturally designed as being more sort of rational, right? They're just put together that way. People like myself are naturally more put together in a passionate, emotional kind of way, okay? And it's a very, very so everything is like given by love, affection, attachments, then you have that whole thing happening at the same time. And one of the journeys, I think, and men and women are also different, I think, in many ways in this regard. I think women, and I don't want to generalize because, there are women who are a lot less emotional, and then there are men who are a lot more emotional. But I'm just going in general, the kind of conversations I might have with my girlfriends, for example, they do tend to be more centric around emotions and how they feel and what somebody has said and how that's left them and stuff like that. Whereas with my male friends and colleagues and, clients and whatever, that's a whole other, another conversation we have there. So I think that it's really important to understand how you yourself are put together. And what are your Achilles heel when it comes to both sides, being rational, overly rational, being emotional, and therefore, what is that? For example, some people can be so loving and that they just want to be with people. They become very attached to people, and that affection is not serving them anymore because it's now ruling them. It's kind of they're not the master of it. It's kind of got them. And when you're very rational, you're not able to empathize with people's states of being, emotions and mental and otherwise, the psychological, then I think that's also an Achilles heel because it stops you from being in their world.
100%. And, one of the things that we can utilize to really describe that is the Jungian preferences, for example. So, this goes right back to Hippocrates' time. So Hippocrates was essentially the world's first doctor, world's first surgeon, world's first GP. I mean, he was it. Everybody would come to him. So he saw a lot of people. And he said, I have found that people tend to have 4 distinct humors, personalities. And Carl Jung comes around several thousand years later and defines that much more accurately. And he says, well, it all depends on where you sit on various spectrum.
Yeah.
Are you introverted? Are you extroverted? Are you sensing or are you judging? Are you logical or are you people orientated type of thing? And depending where you sit on that, you're going to have a preference to one style of behavior than other styles. But it's not to say that we can't adjust our styles depending on the situation that we're in. And that becomes the art. So whether you take a Myers-Briggs test or a disc profile or all of them, a multitude of tests that you can do, they all come from this whole Jungian philosophy. And what I've learned by doing all of those, and I do these tests for other people, is beyond looking to see what your natural preferred state is, now explore to say, how can I fluctuate my natural preferred state so I can, when I'm in this audience, I can fluctuate it so I can build a better rapport there. When I'm in this situation, how can I do it there? I'm a natural introvert. I've always been an introvert. I'm quite happy to be an introvert. And yet I've just done a TEDx talk this weekend.
You did, yeah.
And now I teach people how to do public speaking. I've been on TV, I've done presenting. So it just goes to show that you can fluctuate and move and reshape yourself depending on the circumstances. And again, it comes down to emotional intelligence because this is about, moving beyond the self-awareness. This is about social awareness. This is about reading the room. It's about understanding the environment in which you're operating. It's about that empathy that you talked about earlier on. When you master all of that, you can then start almost molding yourself while ever maintaining that level of authenticity around the core of who you are.
Absolutely. And so when I talk about self-awareness, that for me is inclusive of other people. Because self-awareness by itself, I mean, it's always about you in your environment. And if you can't relate to, you can't, I mean, you're not an island. So if you're on your own, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There'll be a certain amount of feelings and stuff you have to look and be aware of. But in fact, when it really comes into its own is when you're interacting with other people.
Yeah.
And so then that takes you to another level below that, which is to understand, what are the things that nowadays, of course, people talk about being unhealed or there are wounds, I don't know anybody that comes into emotional intelligence without having a certain amount of emotional wounds, Kul. Where do yours come from?
Oh my goodness. if I'm honest, I have so many wounds that if they were visible, I think my jacket would be covered in blood at some point, you know? I think we all collect wounds throughout our entire lives. And anybody who says otherwise, I think, is either extremely lucky and very, very rare, or they're kidding themselves. You know, I've been through an awful lot in my life. I've had a lot of dark times in my life. I've had periods where, you know, I have faced racism, for example, not from necessarily members of the public, which I sort of expect, but I've experienced racism from my colleagues, sometimes quite oppressive and sometimes more subtle, more nuanced. I have, you know, faced dangerous people. I've been in the middle of riots. I've, you know, risked my life on more than one occasion. I've seen more dead bodies than I could even count now. I have seen some really dark stuff in my life, and each one of those will create an etch on your soul, right? And of course, in your private life, I've been through divorce. I know what that feels like. I know the pain of that. I've lost loved ones. I've nearly died when I had tuberculosis many years ago. My eldest brother, 3 years ago, who is a doctor and he was a lawyer, he was like my hero, had a stroke and is now in a wheelchair and can't speak. And but we all collect these. You know, these are not badges of honor necessarily. These are periods of reflection, moments and opportunities of reflection that allow you to grow and strengthen yourself. And that takes me on to the whole idea of emotional resilience, which is something I do an awful lot of work for a lot of organizations, particularly as we're coming out of the whole COVID era. And I think we still have people affected by COVID. So that whole concept of emotional resilience is still there. Whether it's because of some trauma that you've experienced in your life or something as like COVID that is a universal experience. So yeah, we've all got that, haven't we? I'm sure you have as well.
I wrote 3 books.
There you go. There you go.
That was just a small part of my life. Now, since
how can you grow up without having that, right?
Well, I think the point is, what do you do with that? It's really, to me, it's really about that. Because, you know, I like to relate to the journey of life as a soul journey. It's a journey of the soul. Beyond everything else, the human being and all the looking good and all the things that we do, we like, we don't like, all the money we can enjoy or not have, all of that. It just at the end of the day is a reflection somewhere to lead you into the realization. And this is why we're going to talk about self-realization in a bit, that you are more than your body, your mind, your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts. 100%. However, we don't get to that other side of the veil of who we really are, which, you know, I like to relate to the Advait, you know, language, which is about, you know, Atman, Brahman. That is that pure consciousness, which is untainted by all these temporary things. And so we can't get to experience any of that except for by accident every now and then. Maybe when a baby's born, your baby's born and you happen to be present, that moment of euphoria. Or maybe some other moment when you're in love and you step outside of the mind and all your conditioning. Then you experience those flashes of what that state is. But I made up my mind very long time ago in my very sort of, I say just past my mid-20s, that I wanted to have more of my life be that state, live in that state. And then I began to, of course, what happens when you commit, as you know, in emotional intelligence, the moment you say that you're committing to something, everything that's not that shows up. And then you have to deal with that. So then the journey is really about then looking at all these aspects and then looking at to see what is getting in the way of me experiencing myself as my true essence. So for me, the whole journey of life, work, corporates, or being a mother, all of it is about that.
I often reflect on life, and I think the older I get, the wiser I get. I see life as this game that we play, and it is a very temporary illusion. And I think what we're all battling in life is this whole sense of attachment and, on the flip side, detachment. And I think the goal has to be, how do I detach myself from the desires and the noise of the world so that I can get to a true state of bliss? How do I do that? And and it doesn't help when the mass media encourages us to go down a singular pathway, that this is a definition of success. For example, from the moment that we're born, we're taught to compete with each other.
Siblings in particular.
Siblings in particular. From the moment you're at home, to school, to college, to university, even in the workplace, you're taught to compete. And I have learned, and it's taken me a long, long time to realize that competition is not where it's at. The only person I need to compete with is me. I need to be a better version of who I was yesterday. And that is, what are my deeds? What are my thoughts? How detached am I becoming to that noise of the world?
Mm.
And so I famously now say that when people turn right, I will turn left. A, it's a quieter pathway. And B, I will see things that other people won't see, right? I'll experience things that other people won't see.
Except you'll be on your own for a large part of it.
But I'll be on my own. But I think it's something that you said just there. The moment you do that, you are going to be on your own. When you follow a pathway in life that is not like everybody else's, because everyone else is now attached to the world, the moment you start detaching, you're going to be on your own. You might find the odd soul also on that
who
same
joins
journey.
You, which is amazing when that happens.
And when that happens and you have that collective sort of awareness and that connecting coming on, that's pure bliss. But that's the journey I'm on now. So, I have in my core values, my number one core value is Siva. And for those of, you who don't, it's selfless service, isn't it? And I was reflecting this morning because somebody asked me the question, how much voluntary work do you do? And when I sort of totted it all up, I do something like 20% of everything I do is my voluntary service. And I didn't realize it was as much as that. But it feels good, it feels right, and it helps me detach from the noise of the world. So I think this is really, really important. It's really powerful. Whether you do that through a spiritual pathway, whether you just do it as a complete agnostic and say, well, it just feels good for me, matters not to me. And, when it comes to religion, I don't accord with any religion now because they all take you to the same pathway. They all try and describe what it is to be a good human being. And I think fundamentally to be a good human being is to be emotionally intelligent, but also to detach yourself from the attachment that most people are on.
Beautiful. I really relate to that as a sort of a value set that you hold there, because for me, my top value is freedom, inner freedom, and freedom in general.
I love that.
And in order to have that state, you absolutely have to be detached. You have to learn that. And for somebody, as I say, who comes from, wanting to be a people-oriented person, somebody who loves to be around people, somebody who loves to love people, just
it's
love
very
people
easy
to
get sucked up.
Without needing anything back. It's a very tricky one because because the dynamics you have to take care of. So, with other people and so on. And generally being able to do whatever you're doing without being attached to the results even, like you have to do your best and you have to want the results, but you're not doing it for the results. You're doing it because...
How does this work for you then, Smita? And I absolutely agree with everything that you're saying, but it is so challenging, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is challenging. It's not an easy thing to do. So not one pathway to be taken lightly. You have to really think about it. So how do you then balance this desire to be around people and do as much as you can for people, even when that feels like you're getting now attached to something? What do you do?
So every single moment of every single day, I just remember Krishna in the Gita saying, do whatever you're doing and leave it at my feet. Give it to me. I'll take care of it. And it is so challenging because we are in a world, and especially as a business person, as somebody who loves to produce results, big results, I have to constantly remind myself to do my utmost.
Yeah.
And when the results are not coming, and believe me, they're not coming as fast as I want them, then it's still to love the journey, to still appreciate 100%. Developing the skill. Because as I say, beyond everything else, I see this journey as my soul's journey.
Yeah.
That I don't want to die. I've heard you say this before as well. I don't want to die with regret in my heart at all.
100%.
On my heart, on my tongue, in any aspect of my life, I just want to have given it my utmost.
Yes.
I know that I've been bold. I've approached people, who are far greater than me, and maybe they'll respond, maybe they won't respond. It doesn't matter. And maybe one day they will. So I'm just now at a stage where, and I did this when I was in my corporates as well. And because my role was winning business.
Yeah.
And, taking care of the bottom line. So I actually even then said to my bosses, look, you leave me to, I have a way of creating business. Leave me to it. I promise you the results. You're just going to need to let me do it in my own time. And what that meant was that I listened to my intuition. So I listen a lot to my higher self, my intuition. Just listen to that, like when is the right time to do something, when is not the right time to do something. And sometimes it's awkward because it's a very awkward time and you might actually risk losing somebody, like losing their favor if you approach a leader at the wrong point in a meeting or something. But it worked. And I think for me, I always remember that's my journey.
I love that.
Everything else is just the playground.
It's this idea of leaving something at the feet of Krishna. So, if we're talking in the context of universe, people talk about universe, law of attraction. It is about saying, isn't it? You have to do your very best. You cannot confuse the universe. Whatever desires go on up here have to then be translated in the actions here. So the universe has got absolute crystal clarity on what it is that you're absolutely desiring and can see the consistency of your actions. Then the results will follow.
Yeah.
But you have to put faith in the universe or whoever for the results to come eventually.
Yeah.
It's isn't it?
It's not in your hands. As long as you're being integrous to yourself, you have
100%.
integrity in your commitment, you do, as you say, take the action consistent with that. And then, if the result is not there, the only thing to do is to keep looking, keep tweaking. What can I do better? What did I not do right? How can I improve this by 1%, 2%, 10%? And then keep working on that. And maybe at some point that'll happen. But one thing I know for sure is I find the whole journey is enough in a sense of a reward because it's like the lotus flower opening petal by petal by petal.
I love that.
In the midst
because I feel exactly the same.
Yeah, in the midst of the mud.
Yeah,
the lotus is growing and it's blossoming. It doesn't care. Sunshine or whatever the weather, it's like it's there and it's blossoming.
I love that you're saying that because I do think that the journey is more powerful than the destination. I genuinely believe that. And the other thing, I think there's so many nuggets of wisdom in what we were just talking about there around consistency, around being integrous with yourself, not with other people necessarily, although you have to have integrity with others, but integrous with yourself. We very rarely talk about that kind of stuff. What promises have you made to yourself and are you keeping to those promises? Consistency of action and having a level of faith, enjoying that journey. And that actually can apply to every facet of your life, not just business.
Yeah.
It can apply to your romantic relationships. It can apply to a fitness journey that you might be on. It can apply to literally anything, exams, whatever it is. So I think those are really sound principles to follow if you want a successful life, whatever success looks like for you.
Beautiful. I think that's all you can do. So what is self-realization to you if you were to put it into words?
You ask these questions and they have so much depth and meaning to them. What does self-realization mean for me? When I embarked, and it was right about the 1990s when I started on my journey of this self-realization. But for me, self-realization is being able to look at myself in a metaphoric way and being able to see every single crack, pore from every single angle of who I am. In essence, it's about seeing the real me. And I want to be able to see myself almost as this from this third person perspective and see how I operate in the world. What are the footprints that I'm leaving behind? What are the ripples I am creating in the wider world? And how is my journey progressing towards real spirituality? The destination, that destination that we all think about, but may not be brave enough perhaps to talk about. And that destination is lying on that deathbed, reflecting on your life maybe taking your last breath and asking yourself, was it worth it?
Mm.
You know? And I always think that if you go to any funeral, nobody talks about this person was really rich, this person had a Rolls Royce, this person had this bigger house, or they never talk about that. They always say, this is how this person made me feel, good or bad. Oh, this is the change that this person brought about in life. I want people to be able to say that I had some level of positive impact in the world and on other people.
You know, Maya Angelou did say that, Maya Angelou rather, she did say that it's not, it's people remember how you left them feeling. But then again, people see you through the filter of their own stuff, don't they? So you could be the most amazing contribution to them, and that may trigger them in some shape or form. That may trigger a lack in them of some sort or other. So I'm now wondering whether the real measure is your relationship to God.
Yes.
With your higher self.
The final element for me is how closer am I to that eventual spiritual destination that I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, it can only be the God or whoever it is up there who is going to be taking a note of your comments, right?
Or your higher self, your own consciousness will. I mean, the thing about...
We are all doing that, aren't we? Yeah. We all know when we're doing something good or bad.
And we do know. And we do know. And it just works itself out. There's just it's like a momentum that we gather. The more we practice doing something, the more we do something, the more it becomes a thing of its own. And we call that sanskar in Vedic terms. And then that does all of these things, and your desires, what you wish for, what you really, really crave, all these things, when they put together into a little ball called Jivatma, and a spark of consciousness that next lands in a birth, that drives your next journey forward.
Yes.
But I think I'm less inclined these days to wrap myself into a yogic pretzel, turn myself into a yogic pretzel by worrying about what people... Did I leave somebody feeling better?
Yeah.
The other day I was walking on the street. I literally was walking behind this girl, and I just said to her, excuse me. And she was like, she didn't hear me. I said, excuse me. And she was like someone's going to talk to you. I said, that outfit looks fantastic on you. And she was like, oh, thank you so much. And her face, like she could not believe it. Now, you can do things like that, but then there are other people in our own lives that we do a hell of a lot more for.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily see things in that light.
Well,
so what do you can't really rely on what they will say at your funeral. What you can rely on, in my own conscience, did I do what I know myself to be?
Did I do my best?
Was I true to myself?
Yeah. Did I do my best as, in terms of everybody that I came into contact? And we know that we won't always do our best.
Yeah.
Because we're human beings.
Yeah.
We're complex and we make mistakes, right? But you're absolutely right. I think you can only do what you can do, and you can't really account for how people respond because they're carrying their own burdens, and we cannot take responsibility. I used to take responsibility, I guess, for how I made people feel. And then I realized I can't make people feel anything.
No.
Only they can make themselves feel something.
You can try so hard.
Yeah.
And some people will never come around, and you just have to let that be. That's their
100%.
journey. This is yours,
So I have this philosophy now. We've heard this saying that connect with like-minded people. I have this philosophy now. I say like-minded is all very well and good, but if you really want to connect, only connect with like-valued people. Because suddenly it's much deeper.
That's a very valid point. We only relate to people through our own values.
Yeah.
Right? So if I value... For example, if a person values wealth, there is no way that person is going to appreciate somebody who values solitude or some other quality, which is so not like... For them, it's neither here nor there. And the person who values solitude may not have the wealth as a value for them. So you can only relate to people who have, similar values to you. So you can create something. Hopefully, there can be some sort of a bonfire that ignites from that in that relationship. I think that's really valid, but that's part of emotional intelligence to me.
this is how all-encompassing emotional intelligence can be, because emotional intelligence is really about being human-centered. And we talk about human beings being so complex, and these are the complexities. I mean, our conversation has ranged, hasn't it, from self-awareness right through to spiritual awareness and spiritual enlightenment and all of this kind of stuff. But that's human beings.
Yes.
This is how complex we are.
The spectrum.
And, I want to go back to one of your earlier questions. That, what does it look like in a workplace where people are human-centric? And it's that. Any workplace that can embrace all of this level of complexity and still be focused on its business, that's human-centered.
Gotcha. Nice.
And it's not easy.
No.
It is not easy. I'm not saying that this is an easy pathway to take. And I think a lot of the reasons why a lot of companies don't fully throw themselves behind this and then use the excuse that this is a soft skill, it's a nice to have. They know it's not a soft skill. They know it's important, but they know that the pathway to getting there is hard. And that takes the other thing. One of my favorite terms is leadership courage. It takes leadership courage to make these decisions, to go on that journey, to be truly human-centric. But when you get there, it's a bit like this bliss that we're talking about. Everything just seems to slot in. Everything works itself out. Performance looks after itself because the human beings feel valued. They feel appreciated. They feel that they can work to their full potential and they feel they can contribute.
We want to have another conversation about your 26 points that you talked about earlier. I think we've run out of time probably today, right now. But there are two things that I do want to touch on. One is, do you have a personal practice, like a spiritual practice or anything that you do that, really keeps you true to yourself?
Yes, there is. I meditate. I find that meditation is undervalued and misunderstood by so many. Meditation is far more than just slowing down. It is about trying to get yourself to a place where you can sense that you get a taste of the nectar that is bliss. And that takes years of practice. I have long way to go. And I see that as a never-ending journey. But everything I do in my meditation then has to be reflected in life. And I often laugh about, I once went to India with a friend of mine who's a devout Christian. And I said to him, let's do one thing. I said, India is so multi-faith. I said, it will have churches, it will have mosques, it will have the whole lot. Let's go to, all these like amazing spiritual places and do the same prayer. So we went to Jama Masjid, which is the biggest mosque in India. We went to the Baha'i temple. We went to a Hindu temple, like an ancient Hindu temple in Himachal Pradesh on top of a mountain. We went to a church in Shimla on top of a mountain, beautiful church. And we went to the birthplace of Sikhism. And in each one of these places, we said exactly the same prayer. We did the same meditation, same prayer. And I said, did it feel better in one place or the other? My friend said no, but it felt amazing in all.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is my take on religion.
And do you have a particular type of meditation that you do?
So, I followed a spiritual path. I came across a spiritual path in the early noughties called Radha Swami. You might have heard of it. And it just teaches you about...
Radha Swami, the Hare Krishna, he's one of the long time leaders, as it were. He's one of the Swamis in Hare Krishna.
Yeah. So it comes from, there's a blend of Hinduism, blend of Sikhism in there, like Guru Nanak Dev Ji Sikhism.
No, that's not the same one then. That's another one. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it comes from a place called the Bias in Punjab, but it's now all over India.
Okay.
What I love about it is that it welcomes all pathways, all spiritual paths. It brings in all religions. So you'll have Hindus there, you'll have Christians, you'll have Sikhs. And a spiritual leader always says, look, your religion does not define who you are. Your spirituality defines who you are. So keep your religion by all means, but always remember to be a good person, because that's the definition of your spirituality. So I often laugh when I go into churches and I'll go into temples and gurdwaras, and you see these priests doing their thing and they look so devout. They look so amazing. And I always think to myself, yes, but are you being a good person? And does what you do make you closer to God? And often my answer always comes back to no, we're all at the same starting point.
Yeah.
We are all walking in the same direction, and some of us get lost. So for me, this pathway to the universe, to the ultimate, to God, whatever you want to call him, our journey is an individual journey. It is a lonely journey. You can't hold somebody else's hand.
It's all about you with you.
It is, isn't it?
At the end of the day, your relationship
I
with
can't
yourself.
hold your hand and take you on this pathway as you can't hold my hand. And this is where, we talked about when everyone turns right, you turn left. It is lonely. Of course it's lonely, because I think that's what we were put on the earth to do.
Yeah.
Tread a lonely journey towards the right destination.
Well, I think I like to think of it as a journey which really takes you into depth of yourself, where solitude becomes very key as opposed to loneliness. That solitude being that sense of joy at being in relationship with being great with by yourself, and then being in relationship with your higher self.
Yes.
For me, that sort of speaks really a lot in how I develop my spirituality. Yeah. Talking about
and if you do that, then actually your relationship with others improves as well, naturally.
Why? Because you're not attaching to, you're not demanding that they behave a certain way or not in order for you to be happy, for you to be fulfilled. Yeah. And then there's a lot of freedom in relationships. So cool. Lastly, 3 books that you think are just the most unputdownable for the kind of things we've been talking about. What would you point people to?
I was reflecting on this early on today, purely and simply because I had an email from one of the LinkedIn news editors, and it talked about, in summer, that's the time that people slow down a bit and you get a chance to read your favorite book. What would your favorite book be? And I thought, well, you know what? All of my favorite books tend to be like business orientated books, leadership orientated books. But actually, during the summer, I'm currently reading a fictional book about Divergent, which is a 3-part film series that came out a few years ago. So I'm reading that. It takes me out of reality altogether.
Next on your list, Karma and Diamonds.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I've actually got that in my Audible list,
Have you?
I have indeed. So my 3 books that I have read more than once that I really enjoy: 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey. It's like it has to be done. But then there are 2 other books that I really, really do enjoy, and I've read them several times over. One is called The Black Box Thinking by a chap called Matthew Syed, who talks about the defensive nature that so many organizations have, which then prevent them from really working to their full potential. And the other one has got to be Primal Leadership for me, which is Daniel Goleman. It talks about the leadership styles within the context of emotional intelligence, on the spectrum of resonant leadership through to dissonant leadership, pushing and pulling, transactional, transfer, all sorts of names that we can use for it. But he has a beautiful description of the 6 leadership styles. And I use that all the time in the training that I do. And I see those leadership styles in people as I'm coaching them. So yeah, those are my favorites. I've got loads more.
Brilliant. Yeah, I can imagine. Of course you do. So it's been absolutely brilliant
I've
to
really
have this
enjoyed
conversation.
it.
Thank you. Me too. I live for these types of conversations.
I've been interviewed several times, but I have never gone into my own personal spirituality in a discussion before. So thank you for holding my hand and taking me down that pathway.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.